Hello guys, hello Evan, Mai and Rachel. I am Clara. This is the third series of interviews at the gallery. I am on occasion here with you guys for your exhibition at the gallery, Memoirs, the first group exhibition, including the works by Evan, Mai and Rachel. First of all, thank you for joining us and taking the time to answer the questions about the work. I want to start by making a brief introduction to each other's bios, and then we can switch the conversation over the questions, if that's okay with you, and to make it easier. Evan, it is from Cincinnati, Ohio. He works primarily from sources, images of pre-existing artworks from which he intuitively finds portions that resonate with him, and by using abstract cropping and compositional methods incorporates them into new paintings. I have his work behind myself today for this interview, and with a hand of an old master, he is interested in still life as per his unique ability to draw the viewer's attention towards details that, while small and overlooked, often carry great significance. Evan, you are back in Brooklyn, although you took a break in Cincinnati during the lockdown. You will tell us more about that later. You earned your BFA from the Art Academy of Cincinnati in 2013 and graduated with your MFA from Rutgers University in 2016. I have also here with me today Rachel MacFarlane. Hi, Rachel. She's from Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, and in the own words of the artist, in her work, she laments the landscape and manufactures new places through the process of painting. In her mainly large canvases, which is also a question that I will be asking you all today in terms of whether size matters, she translates the memory of a particular place. The artist first builds paper maquettes in small shadow boxes. Rachel is interested in the tension between the invented qualities of the paintings versus the concrete qualities of the still life, allowing her to investigate the conditions of a space as a whole. Rachel is based in New York. She's joining us today from her studio in Brooklyn. She also has an MFA from Rutgers University and a BFA from Ontario College of Art and Design University. I am also very excited to announce her upcoming solo institutional exhibition at MacLaren Art Center, scheduled for 2021 if COVID allows, right?
It's gonna happen.
For sure. And then last but not least, Mai Ta. Mai Ta is joining us today from Saigon, Vietnam, where she just recently moved from New York City. Mai works primarily in small scale paper wash compositions mounted on good boards. Her works have always been a special place to convey her most vulnerable emotions, reinterpreted as memories. In her most recent series, which is what we are showing here at the gallery, Moon Chaser, presented in this exhibition, exactly, she creates an intimate series of paintings that are a product of those feelings. Mai is a recent graduate from the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan in 2019 with her bachelor's in fine art and illustration. I would love now to move on to the questions. It is very important, as I just mentioned with the small brief bios on yourselves, that we can definitely see the connections between the three works, the three practice body of works and the artist, which is that common interest for all in exploring the possibilities of painting, the still lives as a subject, and memoirs, title of this exhibition, memories, as the conceptual cornerstone. So moving into the questions, which I think that is much more interested than me talking and giving a introduction. And of course, anyone that is interested in knowing more about the practice or any kind of additional bios on the artist, they can email us, DM us, or call, of course. And then I'm gonna start with the first question. I am interested to ask you briefly to each of you about the work included in this group exhibition and how these pieces relate to each of you body of work as a whole. So Evan, can we start with you?
Sure, yeah. So the work that is in the show right now is part of a series that I've been working on that actually started in graduate school at Rutgers. And it's where, sort of like you described earlier, I'm taking portions of pre-existing historical artworks and through sketching and digital collages, figuring out new compositions and new ways to present these relatively well-known images and artworks into something that's contemporary or that feels like a new way of looking at them. And still life painting has been a very big influence for me. Even as a kid taking art classes, I was always drawn to making still life drawings. And so in these works in particular, they come out of Spanish still life painting from the very early 1600s. And although a lot of what is represented in the works that are in the show and sort of in general in my practice they're not always directly still life. I think my approach is one of a sort of like methodology of still life, which is like a lowering of the gaze from these like a historical painting or a portrait or something that is focused on humans or the actions of humans. Still life is like you said, actually, Clara, in the intro, it's like a slowing down and a looking at things that are maybe mundane or that are overlooked. And so I think just in the way that I'm wanting to present these images is like a slowed down or a sort of condensed look at these things that we maybe know from art history and have overlooked or maybe not seen as quite as important. So
thank you, Evan. Thank you very much. And it's something that I want to also bring into the next question, which is very much about this idea of labels, right? For us, when we are putting a show together, a group exhibition of artists, in your case, you and Rachel knew each other, but with Mai, we brought her to the group show. It's always kind of interesting, the connection that we as an art historians or curators or galleries create versus the connection that potentially you three will see in each other's work. And I'm very interested to also ask the opinion of the artist. Rachel, I will pass the question to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. So the work that's in the exhibition right now are all from a recent body of like a series of work, but also a recent exploration in more direct research of landscapes. So in 2016, I did a residency in Ontario, actually, like back where I'm from, at the Doris McCarthy Artist in Residence program. It's this cottage on top of these bluffs, and my work started to like turn its gaze towards landscape, and all these images started to appear in the maquettes that I was building. So I've built maquettes, these like paper still life shadow boxes for a long time now, and they've taken all sorts of different variations. But it wasn't until that residency that I started to realize that my formative experiences with landscape as like sort of the site of play and also exploration as a youth started to come through into the work. So over the last year and a half, I've been going on excursions to specific landscape sites in order to kind of see what happens when I build this relationship more directly through visiting specific places and then trying to distill them into the paper maquettes. So basically what happens is, well, some of the works that are in the show right now, one is based on a scene from Newfoundland, another's based on a sort of desert scene from a trip to Arizona, and the third one is from a hike I went on in Kootenai National Park. And so for each of those, I'm not directly, referencing a photograph. I'm not directly even referencing drawings. I'm just coming back into the studio after being and experiencing those places and trying to rebuild and recreate a moment in that landscape in this small still life space. And the reason I use these models is really to bridge two kinds of ways of looking at images. One is through like this really concrete, material physical object, which is the model, and then this projected space, which is the illusion of that landscape in the painting. And I'm, you said in your intro that I've discussed it as like lamenting the landscape, and I feel like that's really true. I'm interested in this loss of experience of a physical kind of nature, and how that also gets like recreated in new kinds of media. Which does two things. It replaces that desire. I think we all have this human desire to be in these kinds of exploratory spaces, but it also pushes us farther away from those spaces. It replaces it so that we maybe don't actually take those moments out in space. And so I'm not like a technophobe, but like I use a lot of those new media technologies and things like that, but I'm really interested in us discussing those two different kinds of spaces. And I think painting's a really interesting media to use to do that. I don't want to talk too much. I feel like that kind of gets to the heart of what those works are doing, like what those specific works in the show are doing. And I guess the bigger, there's the bridge to the other artists through elements of still life coming in. And I definitely love to play with scale in my work, and I'm happy to talk about that later. But also there's this idea of memory, like what happens with memories and how that ends up being represented through a kind of translation in painting. And I think that definitely the other artists also do that. So it's really exciting to be in this show.
Thank you, Rachel. Mai, passing the question on to you, can you tell us a little bit also about your practice?
My work has always been pretty autobiographical. They're all a reflection of like whatever stuff that I'm like going through at the time. And Moonchaser is no different from that. And I think that like, if you look at my work a year ago, like I was interested in different things, like elements of Vietnamese culture and my own family's background. And I used that to kind of support the whole series and like support whatever it is I wanted to talk about. This year, because there was so much turbulence like all around, I kind of learned to accept the things I can't change and learn to not obsess so much over control and to enjoy the smallest like happiness, like just like watching the moon with my friends on a rooftop. And yeah, like it's just this year I got into astrology, I got into watching the moon and watching the stars, and it reflected in my work. And I think that it's just gonna keep doing that until I one day stop making art.
Thank you, Mai. Moving into the next question, and connected to the previous one. And I wanted actually to particularly address this to Mai and Evan, since both have moved out during lockdown. In Mai's case, back to her hometown in Saigon. So how has the current situation impacted you and your practice as an artist? Rachel, you can also add in here. I need to be very honest. This is a question that we must ask. In this case, I felt that was important because Evan and Mai moved although Evan is coming back, is planning to be back shortly to Brooklyn. So, but it's also important, you know, it's important to know your thoughts about how this situation is affecting you, and also how it might have affected your practice. Some artists tended to use or go more for paper, of course, small scales, and so on. So I was curious to hear also your thoughts here.
Mhm.
Evan, you can start if you wish.
Sure. Yeah. So I left the city about the beginning of April,
Mm-hmm.
and I went back to Ohio, where my family's from, and ended up staying there for about 5 months. And yeah, as you know, as disappointing I think as it was to have to leave New York, it was also a chance for me to like kind of reset. And a good friend of mine who lives back in Cincinnati had a space that he let me use as a studio for that whole time, which was really amazing. And I got to paint, you know, pretty much full time for almost 5 months. And most of the work that's in the show right now, I finished over the summer. So, you know, it's like, it's hard to be like happy about that, I guess, just because it's such a devastating time for so many people. But you know, I'm just really grateful to my family and friends to like welcome me back on such short notice and give me the space and the time to be able to focus on making work,
Yeah.
which is, you know, kind of it's the dream, you know. Full-time studio life would be you know, it's the
Absolutely.
best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mai, for you, how is the transition going? Because it was very recent that you moved back to Saigon, to Vietnam.
Um, I think this whole year taught me to, I don't know, it affected my art in that like it taught me that I can just be more patient with my ideas and not force them in a sense, because like when quarantine happened, like we were all kind of forced into this place of like self-reflection. At least it was
Yeah.
for me. And I started asking like a lot of questions about who I was and the way that I feel and the way I act and the way I appear. And the concept of control came up again, because this situation, like, you literally have no control over anything. Like I tried to leave like probably like 3 times before I actually left. And yeah, it just taught me that like all I can do is to go with the flow and just translate whatever it is that's like going on in my head, whichever idea that I have, onto paper, and just be really vulnerable and be really honest about it, because sometimes that's like the only thing you can do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Rachel, do you want to add something here?
Sure. I mean, like I said before, I was doing all these research excursions, so I actually wasn't able to do the things that I had planned. So even though I didn't move out of the city, it did stop me from taking some like kind of important trips to build the next body of work, which I'm focusing on for that institutional show that you were mentioning. And it also really like highlighted exactly what I'm interested in, which is that we are like, I'm literally prevented from going to these landscape spaces. And that is partly what I'm trying to draw upon in my work, and this kind of insular space of being in the studio, rebuilding places became even more like enhanced through the whole situation. So even though it hasn't been necessarily positive, the like the social landscape that we're in is actually pretty poignant to what I'm thinking about, you know. And there's sort of a seismic shift happening with how everyone is remote, everyone's stuck inside, you know, like there's something happening on this global level that really interests me as an artist. And so you know, it's not good to get inspired by bad things, but I'm certainly like a little bit intrigued by this moment and like trying to bring in that in a generative way into the studio.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be doing this format, like we wouldn't be doing this had, no. So
I mean, we need to, this is the situation we are living in. We need to adapt somehow, right?
Exactly.
It's interesting to see how people adapt, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Although I think that we are all very much looking forward to an end and a closure of this situation. Moving into the third question, and very much connected as well to where we were talking about, and Evan in particular, these labels that we tend to create in order to organize thoughts, our history, and many other things in life. I want to mention that realism plays an important role in the context of each of your work, but also do memory or imagination, right? So I would like to ask, how do you feel about those labels, that they might tend to categorize you and your practice within figurative painting? Do you consider yourself also as part of that label? Mai, we can start with you, since I would like to also ask and know your opinion on this, on being, if you consider your work that will fall into the category of figurative painting.
I mean, like I just use the image of my body and my face because it just seems natural to how I tell and how I express what I'm going through in my art. And it's also a way for me to accept the way that I look as well. And I can't be like, I can't claim to be like the most knowledgeable about art history or even contemporary like art criticism. So it makes me feel inclined to not control my narrative in a way, because I think that like the moment the art is put out there, it no longer really belongs to its creator. And so I feel like no matter how people see my work, no matter how they want to label it, I'm just interested to see how they feel about it, because it's a combination of everything that goes on in their lives to lead them to that opinion almost. Yeah.
And I totally I believe that that's what it should be. But it's very interesting here, this question also, because in general terms, the images that you are creating and presenting, the three of you, are very much kind of digested by memories. So that realism plays like a kind of weird role here. So Rachel, what would be your thoughts for you as being considered a figurative painter?
Sure. I mean, I sort of really pull from like all sorts of different genres of painting at once. You know, like I'm definitely indebted to like a history of landscape painters. I also like Evan, love early like still life paintings, and we've had many conversations about artists that we really admire. And so, as I don't have, you know, physical human figuration in my work, but the work is figurative in the sense that I'm drawing on real forms, but in more than one way. Like there's the representation of the actual like paper and like model and like the kind of trompe-l'oeil that these paper maquettes can build, and then there's the other kind of figuration, which is much more imagined, that I'm drawing from like the memory of the landscape. So I sort of feel similar in that I feel like these labels can really reduce the way that we approach in particular painting. And I'm very interested in what happens when they all collide into one space. So abstract paintings are just as influential to me as like, you know, high Renaissance paintings in the way that they negotiate space in the kind of illusionistic plane of a painting. So I feel like very much grateful for the kind of like multifarious influences that, especially now that we have, you know, we can quickly go into like a museum's collection on their website, see like highly detailed images. You know, I'm drawing from so many different resources in what influences the paintings. I don't feel beholden to any of those kinds of labels so much as I don't think I'm purely anything. So I kind of reject this idea of like a pure figurative or realistic painter. I think they all kind of engage with these different aspects of painting.
Thank you, Rachel. Evan, very curious also to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of gonna piggyback off of what Rachel was just talking about. I think, I mean, that is a question I think about often, because whenever, if I meet someone and they find out I'm an artist, they ask, you know, what kind of work do you make? And I never know how to answer that question because, you know, it's like, do I say I'm a representational painter or figurative painter when most of the time I'm working from a painting, which is an interest. I mean, it is an object in a lot of ways, but it's also an image. So that is, you know, it's like this in between. I'm sort of painting the in between of what the artist was looking at, their work, and then me representing their work. So it's like there are kind of these stages in between the physical objects that I'm representing and then what I'm actually making. So, you know, it's sort of like this chain of representation going, you know, from my work back to whatever objects the original artist was painting. So, and I think, you know, in undergrad, a lot of the work that I made was very influenced by minimalism and hard edge abstraction. So I tend to think of myself still much more as an abstract painter using representational methods, because I still don't think that like representation to me is not necessarily my subject matter. It's more like a means to, like I was saying before, creating this overall impression of like what still life painting, or like what slow painting and looking looks like.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Evan. I am a little bit scared to ask then the following question, because we are going a little bit in that same line, which is the value of technique as an important conceptual tool for you all. I mean, if there's something, this is again the kind of question that an art professional would ask, and the artist would say, you know, this is not about it, well, about that only, right? But I'm also very curious to hear if there is something you would like to remark or share with the audience about your process in terms of technique. And Rachel, you can start if you wish, so that we give Evan a little bit of a break here.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I struggle over that question. You know, and I teach a little bit. I'm teaching part-time at Rutgers actually right now, and I'm talking
what are you
to
teaching?
my early painting. Pardon?
What are you teaching?
I'm talking to my early. I'm teaching painting, like a painting course right now, at Rutgers. Yeah, and I'm constantly having to have this conversation with my students. Actually, like what is the value of technique? Is there one technique to be making a painting? And I've been trying to stress that, you know, I don't think technique is completely unimportant. I wouldn't say that. I think that paintings are made of the language of mark making. And what kind of like mark making you make makes a huge influence on what the viewer is going to explore in the painting. You know, it's the language that tells the story. And especially in work like mine that doesn't tell like a direct narrative, it becomes more about what happens in the language of painting, you know, whether or not something is like scumbled in, if something is like indicating like a flickering of light through the kind of impasto mark making, whatever it is, that's what I think paintings are really made of. But I don't feel, sort of like your question about labels, I don't feel like connected to only one kind of technique in a painting. I really try to like push how those things come together in one setting, which is the painting itself. And you know, like I would think with like Evan's work, for example, that his technique in the way that he's building these paintings are really, and maybe I'll just like pass it over to him after, but like, you know, like it's a very different technique than what I'm using, but it's like vital that he's painting it in the way that he is, colliding with these other parts of the painting. And I feel like that, I feel like a connection to him like that, even though our paintings have very different energies, you know? So it's important. But it's not like behemoth, you know, it's not about like mastering technique. It's about how you then kind of puzzle piece those together into building a painting that does whatever it is that you're interested in it talking about. So I've been trying to tell my students that as well. So maybe I'll get something out of this conversation to bring back to them.
That's a great
Evan,
thing to teach.
Oh, what was that?
Evan, sorry.
That's a great thing to teach them.
Glad.
Evan, do you agree, right? Do you feel same way as Rachel here?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's really about like the technique should really just be another tool, or it's like it's the means to the end of like what you want your work to show or to convey in general. And I think, yeah, I mean, for me right now, it is really important, I think, because I'm working so closely with art history, I want to, you know, I want to honor the artists and the work that I'm representing and do it to the best of my ability. I'm also interested in trompe l'oeil painting and like, you know, the viewer's relationship to the painting as an object. So that is also, you know, a reason why the work has to be as believable as it is, because I want there to be a physical interaction, not just visually, but when you see the work in person, there is that moment of trompe l'oeil where you're like what actually is going on here. So yeah, I mean, I think what Rachel said is pretty spot on.
Mai, do you want to add something, or do you also feel kind of the same way as what they are saying in terms of technique?
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like every technique is unique to whoever that's using it. And that's what makes art so amazing, that we get to see these different perspectives and see how people use how something that exists in their mind translates into like a physical thing. So like I used to struggle with this idea of like good art and bad art is like something that is like technically good is good art and the other one is like bad, but there's no such thing in art really, because like I said before, we all have our own things going on in our lives that informs our opinions, and those opinions turn into interest, and that informs our viewpoint in art as well. So yeah, it matters. Like I'm just kind of a masochist in my love for details. Like that's it.
That's where we divide.
So moving now, we are arriving to the end of this interview. It's been like very interesting to hear all your thoughts here together about the work and art in general. This is an interesting question, which is, does size matter? Evan and Mai, as far as I know their practice, they tend to work in a small scale formats, whereas for Rachel, she tends to use larger scales formats. So is there a reason for that? Mai, we can start with you, since I would say that for you, the small format is kind of something iconic on your practice.
To be honest, it's like I got really sick of stretching and gessoing a giant canvas when I was in college. And one of my professors introduced me to these like Mughal emperor paintings, and they're like tiny and they're so detailed. And from that, I started like working smaller on watercolor paper at first, and then I started mounting them on wood, and then I started like have this weird fascination with how like because like how small it is, like people get really close up into it, and that makes me like maybe they might be picking apart like the little details that I added in there more. But I also have a great appreciation for big paintings, because there are just like some ideas that you have to have on a big canvas for it to work. Like Rachel's work, like I don't think it would be as iconic like Rachel's work if it wasn't like that size.
I guess, I understand. It's the kind of message. I mean, the strength of nature, of landscape, the power, right? And that goes in large and good scale.
Like that's why like abstract expressionism works so well on large canvases. Like it's just big and bold and just like takes up space, and that's all it needs to do.
Rachel, do you agree with kind of the message that you want to represent and to put out there? It needs a large format?
Well, I do make some smaller paintings, but they're usually slightly different in subject. For the smaller works, I try to come closer into elements of the landscape. They're almost like still lifes of landscape, you know, little details, and thinking a little bit more about trompe-l'oeil, which I'm also interested in, and happens so in such an interesting way when I build these shadow boxes in particular and light them. So it depends on what I'm looking for in the specific piece, what scale it's going to be, what the subject is. But definitely for the larger works, it's not so much about, I mean, I love this idea of the power of nature, and I've been looking at making some paintings that are, well, I have one large, like 6 by 7 foot piece here that is about like a kind of, it's called The Tempest at Earth's Edge, and it's about like a sort of major storm. And so that really like required being a large painting. Like there was no way I was going to make a small painting about that subject matter. So I would say that it depends on what I'm trying to represent in the painting, what scale makes sense. But it's not just about it's not just about power. There's something about that makes me really excited just to hear it described that way. But it's maybe more about transportation. And that was one thing I was thinking about with all 3 of our works. Like Evan's work kind of forces us to time travel, like a bit, like to think back at that original painting and the source. And Mai's work is like, it very much like tells a story of a setting and like a lighting and like things that you want to transport to. And with the larger scale works, I definitely want to make a dimensional kind of space that is a bit uncanny of the original so that you can project yourself into it. And I think that the larger scales really help to manufacture that. And there's just something interesting about taking really small, like when my maquettes are like postcard size. So like, and then what happens when that's translated on this larger scale and what slippages there are, or things that are left out, or things that I have to simplify in a larger scale that wouldn't normally happen if I was painting a direct landscape and things like that. So it's like a few different reasons.
Evan, what would be for you your thoughts here?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I was hoping, Rachel, that you would bring up your maquettes, because I think what's really interesting about this show is my work and Mai's work are, you know, we take some of the works that I reference are actually fairly large, and you know, Mai, your work is about the figure, but it is condensed into this really small. So we're like taking these large things and condensing them, and Rachel's almost doing the opposite, where she's like taking this really small condensed thing and then expanding it.
Really big
so I
thing,
think,
and then small,
yeah.
and then big again.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so for my work, you know, like I've said before, I'm very interested in still life, and particularly trompe l'oeil still life painting, which is all about, you know, painting the objects to scale and having there be that physical relationship to the painting and the objects. And then again, you know, it's meant to fool the eye. So like scale is very important with trompe l'oeil painting in terms of being able to make the work believable, or to have that moment of fooling the viewer. I think, you know, it also is like, you know, it's a personality thing too. I think, you know, I don't know, there's something about the working in this scale that just feels really right. There's not always like a conceptual reason for those things. You know, I think obviously my interest in still life and trompe l'oeil lends itself to making smaller works, but there's also something really nice about being able to really like push one work as far as you can, and having it be a smaller scale, at least for me, helps me like really condense a lot of work and energy into this small thing, which again goes back to my interest in making an artwork that's really condensed and makes the viewer slow down and, you know, sort of, what I really hope for viewers of my work to do is to sort of be caught off guard a little bit, and to like force them to reevaluate the object that they're looking at, and to hopefully, you know, take that out into the world and life, I guess, in general, and to yeah, it's sort of like a perspective shift, a conceptual perspective shift.
Absolutely, super, very good point. I'm arriving now to the last question, which is actually a question for you guys, in case that there is something that you would like to ask or share with each other. Maybe starting with how you all feel the show came together and how the works relate to each other. Both Arnie and I feel all works interact very nicely, but also I wanted to know what were your thoughts. And after I open up to your questions, I would like to share briefly a PDF, a presentation of the show with the audience. So I'll let you discuss a little bit and ask each other any questions if you have. So. Rachel,
cool.
okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's
well,
fine.
No. Well, so I was able to be there with you and Arnie to, you know, assist you guys a little bit in laying out the show, and that was really a cool experience. You know, I knew and know Rachel's work very well. Had never seen Mai's work in person, so it was a really fascinating thing of like opening up Mai's work and going like, oh my gosh, like these are so small and like and beautiful, and like these precious special little things. And yeah, and well, especially because I knew they were gouache, so I assumed they were paper, but I didn't know that they were mounted on the boards with the colored sides, and they just had such a different physical presence than I was expecting. And so then like seeing that in relationship to my own work and to Rachel's work, yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was really cool.
Super. Rachel, well, I only saw the show from pictures, but I guess that they were enough to give you a little bit of an idea of how nicely the show, each piece interacts with each other.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that there's such like a sweet connection between our color palettes. Like somehow the colors that all three of us chooses sort of exist in the same plane. Like they're not the same, but they're like the same kind of green that we all uses. Like it's kind of the red string that like ties the show together. So I wanted to ask you guys, like, how does color inform your work? Like, how much effect is color? How much effect does color have on your work?
I think that's a great question for Rachel.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel like we have very, like, that might be a way that we're really different, Evan, because you're working from this like primary source. I'm sure you choose things based on their color. I want to know about that. But like color is such a big part of my practice, especially I feel like it's only getting deeper too. For a long time, I made maquettes that didn't have any color in them, and I was inventing color. And now I I hand paint a lot of paper that I then I'm cutting up and like fusing together in these little models. And then I've also been experimenting with well, my husband's a photographer and he got me like a set of like test light gels. So I've been like playing with all these colored like photographic light gels, which has been really impactful in then referencing the paintings. So I'm really interested in the kind of phenomenology of color, like what happens to like an atmosphere in a space, and trying to capture that and render it in a painting. And for me, that's part of the experience of being out in a site is this particular sense of color space and atmosphere. And then what happens inside the studio is that I'm trying to replicate it all through this like artificial kind of materials, which is then still speaking to this larger narrative that I'm interested in. So I like to play with color. I'm interested in the artifice of color and how it's used to replicate like real spaces. I can talk about color forever and I won't. So that's a little taste of what I'm interested in. We can have like a Google chat if you want sometime. Because I feel the same way about, especially about the little series that you made about this like kind of moonlight and like the colored sides and the way that they glow on the wall, and how they're both like objects and these little like moments of atmosphere. I think is like such a, I feel like we might understand each other there.
It's like I think I look at your work and the word sublime comes out a lot, and I think that the idea of like the sublime is something that artists are fascinated with, especially with like the Hudson River landscape. I don't know their names.
Well, for me the Hudson River Painters, I think is what they're called. But for me, the background is Group of Seven. That's our Hudson, because I'm Canadian. So there's a long tradition. It's a very similar kind of group of painters that went out into the landscape and made work.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay. It's just so like, that's why it's like I love artists who can have their work like on such like a big surface, because I think it takes a lot of I think it does take like a certain amount of courage to be able to like kind of translate something so grand, something like, because nature is already so grand and you put it through your filter, put it on canvas, and it's just amazing. Yeah. Very grateful to be in the show with you.
Oh, I'm really excited to be all together in this show. I was just thrilled when it all came together and we walked through the space. There's like these really great tethers between all of our work in these very different ways. I think that's what makes it really interesting.
Yeah, and Evan, I can't remember the title of the painting, but that one painting where you did with the little paintings of the leaves and the trees and the flowers, and I think that is just like, you just speak on like every level of like the detail loving like fanatic that I am. Like, I absolutely love that painting that you did.
Cool, thank you.
So if you let me now, I'm gonna share quickly the presentation. I think that people will enjoy memoirs with these new technologies. This is the view from the gallery. Mai Ta's works on the right. and the large canvases of Rachel. On the left, this is the Moonchaser series by Mai Ta. They look amazing, very beautiful. You can realize here on the scale, this is the corridor with Rachel on the right and Evan on the left. Then we get here on the back of the gallery. We have again Rachel on the right and Evan on the left, Rachel's work. And then here I wanted to briefly show all the pieces that we have included in the exhibition so that we can give a better context to all the audience, gallery, friends and collectors watching the interview. And of course, we are very happy to send any resolution images, but I think that this gives a little bit of context also to the words, to what we were saying here today. This is the series of Mai. Very special as well. We can see here much better the quality on the wash, on the paper. And this is all, guys. I mean, thank you so much for joining me here today. Thank you very much for taking part of this beautiful, beautiful exhibition. For all the people that might watch this video, we are open till December 2nd. We invite everyone to come. They can book an appointment via email or pass by the gallery. So thank you very much for your time and for the works on your works.
Cool.
Thank you, Clara.
Having us.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Ciao.